So we make a start then, Kelly. Do you want to lead us off?
Thank you very much, Robert. So it's a pleasure to welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. And our webinar is entitled Our Journey to Place Mental Health and Wellbeing at the Centre of Our School Culture. And this is at Dulwich College Shanghai Puxi. Welcome to everyone.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and also thank you very much for allowing us to use some of your information to allow us to use your skill and well-being. And it's a great opportunity to showcase all that you do at Dulwich College in Shanghai Puxi, as I now know it's pronounced, and what you're doing incredibly well to demonstrate this remarkably powerful tool that enables you to measure, track, and improve the mental health of all your pupils by being predictive, preventative, and precise. So thank you again for allowing us and giving up your time as well. But first of all, I'm just going to ask Trevor, a member of the STEER team, if he can just explain very briefly what STEER does, and then we'll look at how you've been introducing it, what it gives you, and how it's different from other well-being surveys, tools that are around. So thank you, Trevor, as well, and just over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This will just be a brief introduction. So STEER as a company was founded 10 years ago to proactively safeguard students' mental health and well-being. So to explain this, if you imagine adolescence as a road between childhood and adulthood that young people have to steer, hence the name, we know a number of students who are socially, emotionally crashing, and that number is going up all the time. So STEER set out to equip teachers to act earlier to identify and support those who are struggling before they emotionally crash. And we do this by measuring something different to traditional self-reports. You'll be familiar with assessments that ask students explicit questions about bullying, self-harm, or anxiety. And whilst these are important, these questions are very easy for students to filter what they tell you, and which means the students' risks may remain hidden. And secondly, their responses alert you to current risks that you're probably aware of anyway. So the STEER assessment identifies students with hidden or emerging risks by asking a very different set of questions which measure how a student is self-regulating or steering across 4 factors foundational to their emotional well-being and their sustained academic progress. The first factor is self-disclosure, so how much students share or keep private what they're actually thinking and feeling. Second factor is their trust of self, so how much students trust or question themselves. Thirdly, their trust of others, how much a student trusts or questions other people. And lastly, seeking change, how much students seek or limit change. So most students will steer 4 factors in a healthy way, making wise choices depending on who they are with and what they are doing. But some students struggle, increasing their risks of crashing. Knowing who they are and what they're struggling with early enough enables teachers to be proactive, preventative, and precise, giving the right student the right signpost at the right time. So we are not just stopping students from crashing, we are teaching students to steer, and that's such an important skill for life in school and out of school and beyond. So what does STEER enable teachers to do? So 1, hear every student's voice every term through a 10-minute online assessment. 2, build a longitudinal narrative of each student's social emotional steering from the age of 8 to 18. 3, prioritize students with emerging or hidden risks, both in and out of school. 4, write targeted action plans to reduce the risks and teach the child to steer healthily. And lastly, to measure what impact those action plans had. So that's just a brief introduction of how STEER works.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Trevor, for that. And I think that really helps us to set the scene. And if we could if I could go back to Fran and Kelly, could you just sort of introduce, first of all, tell us a little bit about your school and your roles within the school?
Thank you, Robert. I'll begin there. So my name is Kelly King, and I am the head of senior school at Dulwich College Shanghai Puxi. I have been here for the last 6 years and was here when we first introduced AS Steer. Our college is from 2 to U, and in the senior school we look after children from year 7 through to 13. We follow the British or the English national curriculum loosely, and we consider how we can dial up and enhance that curriculum to support the needs of our individual students and cohorts. We then move on to the IGCSE, followed by the IBDP diploma, with students who have now graduated from us studying at universities in countries far and wide. I'm joined by my colleague Francine Hunt, who I shall hand over to now.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm Assistant Head of Senior School. I'm responsible for the pastoral care of years 7 to 13. I have a team of pastoral leads, and we look after the well-being of all year groups, but pastoral leads of specific year groups. Our roles cover intervention. It could be pastoral, could be academic, could be transitions, the wellbeing curriculum, but also the wellbeing provision as a whole. Most importantly, the role of my team is about developing positive relationships, and that's with students, but their families too, and that enables us to successfully navigate those challenging teenage years that were just spoken about. And our main goal is to ensure that all our students as well have a trusted adult in the school.
Brilliant, thank you. And I mean, what key roles they are, aren't they? That pastoral section, and hopefully as we will go through this, we'll see how Steer plays its role in helping you to do all those many things. So could I ask, Fran, sorry, I think it was Kelly, wasn't it, actually? What was it that made you decide to use Steer tracking at Dulwich College?
Ultimately, we made the decision because how we understood AS Steer was that it was going to make a difference in the lives of the children who we have been entrusted with. And it was interesting to hear from Trevor that Steer is 10 years old. And the reason why I found that really interesting is because I can imagine that Steer, along with us in terms of the way in which it's used, has grown and developed, and is possibly, it looks quite different from how it first started.
Very different.
We saw, sorry?
Yeah, very, very different. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And what we saw as a new and developing school was that we had this golden opportunity to establish a different way of doing things. And when we talk about placing mental health and well-being at the centre of our school culture, it's not just rhetoric we wanted reality, and that was looking at practice that would help to inform decisions that were going to be right by these students. So with this golden opportunity to establish a different way of doing things, we weren't just looking at the academics, we were also looking at how the pastoral team could support in ensuring that holistic approach and provision. What I would say is that we are evidence-led in all that we do. And upon engaging with Steer, what we saw very quickly was that it was useful by way of identifying and supporting, as Trevor just shared, individual students that then prompted us to have a much more closer look at students in a way that we hadn't before. We were engaging with terminology that was new to us. We were engaging with a way into understanding our students that was new to us. And as we have grown and evolved in our use of Steer, so has the way in which we've used it. For example, we had reference to informing individual action plans, and now we're looking at it from a far more strategic point of view, looking at whole cohorts. And what I would say we have found very, very powerful is the use of the new parent mapping tool to support us in engaging with conversations. So why? It's because we say knowing our children is at the core of everything we do. And we believed and still believe that AS Steer enables us to do that.
Yes, it's interesting. You use that sort of word terminology. It's a very powerful thing, actually, isn't it? That shared terminology across a school where everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. And also I like the way that you have managed to go from looking at individuals to looking at that strategic across the school, which we'll come to look at in a moment. So can you explain how you first of all introduced it to the school, and what it's involved in terms of training?
So we are firm believers in looking at the why rather than the what and the how. And that's what we did. We looked at why we would be using this, what it could do for us in informing our understanding of the students, that was different from other platforms that may be out there or other types of surveys that might be out there. And with that, we also had to consider who amongst the body of staff would be our main drivers, and then who our secondary drivers would be. And we've got a fantastic Department of Student Services at the school, and we felt that actually this fit within that body and that faculty, specifically with our social and emotional counsellor. So we spoke with our social and emotional counsellor and introduced them to it, and ensured that at the very initial stages of conversation with Leslie, who we were engaging with first this year, that our social and emotional counsellor was involved in those conversations so that he could understand the why, because we needed that department to be the main drivers. After that, we then needed to speak with the staff body, who were going to be the secondary force. They were the ones who would be guided and led by our social and emotional counsellor, and also the pastoral team, in understanding what it did once we'd established the why we were using it, how we were going to approach that. Also, it took training. So if we were asking colleagues to invest their time, they needed to know it was worth it. What we didn't have was a set of data that could show previous successes with students with STEER before from our own school body, because we didn't have any. So we had to really trust the system, trust what we were being told, and also reference the fact that a lot of work for STEER, well, all work from STEER was being generated by leading professionals in their field, and also working very closely with Leslie around this. After that, we then had to consider the student body and how we introduced it to them. We refrained from using terminology like test or assessments, because we didn't want them to see this as another type of test or assessment, because they would then conflate that with things that they may do in the academic aspect of their lives at school. So we ensured that it was our mentors who spoke with and worked with our students once they had a firm grounding and understanding of what it was that we were trying to achieve, how we were going to do it, and what that then entailed. What I would share before I hand over to Francine is that was the introduction. Francine will talk about the training. I can't tell you that we have got it right, even in the way in which we introduced it. I referenced that we were doing this without our own student data to know whether it was going to make an impact or not. And so what I would say is that upon hindsight, possibly we were introducing it at surface level of knowledge and understanding, but we did believe that what we were being told was going to be supportive of our students based on the evidence that you were using, the literature you were providing, and that's why we moved forward with it.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a sort of very comprehensive, and you're right. It's taken a long time to get from where we are now to where we've come from, and our two co-founders, Dr. Simon Walker, who's a cognitive science, is very much, as you said, a leader in his field in terms of how people are thinking, and then Dr. Joe Walker is an educationalist, and you put those two together and you've got an incredibly powerful force. And if anyone wants to have a look at the background to all their work, that can all be seen on our website. So Francine, do you want to tell us a little bit about the training? Because all the training can be done online. There is a new training program there now, which is just about an hour and a half long. Do you want to tell us about a little bit about how you trained everybody up?
Yes, so the launch of AS Steer for new staff, because we are an international school, so it can be relatively transient in new staff. So training is quite important there. That's largely led by the social and emotional counsellor. The training is made available to them online. What we do first is ask mentors. So imagine our mentors to be similar to those like form tutors in other schools. We ask for them to do the training first because actually we need to get to know the students in front of us. After they have completed their online training, we then ask all teachers to complete it. And the reason why we do it in those two stages is we learn over the years that when you start a new school, there's a lot to take in, and we don't want something like AS Steer training to get lost within that. Equally, the mentor role is very important, so that has to happen as soon as you start. After the online training, I'd say the training that we provide is largely on-the-job training. We will never allow a mentor to just go and do an action plan if they're new, for example. Our pastoral leads will walk them through that process, including reviewing them. Our social and emotional counsellor also supports. They'll attend meetings, especially during points of review. But the key thing in terms of training is we just strive to use the AS Steer terminology in our everyday language here. And that in itself is to secure the knowledge amongst the whole staff body.
Yeah, and I think that sort of getting alongside and mentoring is such a powerful thing to do, isn't it? Yeah, you're absolutely right. The online training gives you a huge amount, and then those meetings where you're getting alongside your colleagues and are able then to mentor them and show them good practice, I think is very powerful. I'm just going to share my screen now and just show some slides, because our next question looks at what does the steer data give you that other surveys might not. So I'm just going to share a slide and hopefully this will work. Perhaps you could tell me when you can see my my slides. Can you see those now? Are you able to see them?
Yeah.
Perfect. So if I just move on to that one, so can you just give us a little bit of an understanding of what the data gives you that perhaps other surveys might not?
So I will share some broader strokes here before I hand over to Fran. Anytime we talk about steer, we often use the words crystal ball in the same sentence. Because that's exactly what it's like when we are either revisiting data or looking at data as we begin the action plan process. It really does allow us to look and see what lays ahead for some of our students. And in our first year of implementation, before we were fully well versed in the use of steer, there were some students who we would look back and say, come on, let's have another look at the action plan and the profile, and we would be amazed by how specific the information that had been identified as part of the steer program. And at each point in that first year of engaging with it, we would say, oh, why didn't we look at steer first? And that has then encouraged us to be more habitual in our behaviours around the way in which we use steer. What I would also say is it really does speed up the process of letting you know more about your students and the ways in which you can support them. And what we have found is that the data that we receive as part of the steer process is that it complements existing structures within the school, that delicate ecosystem where you're considering all pieces of information or evidence around a child. This allows you to use it in conjunction with it and not in isolation of it. The other 2 points I would make that are more general is that the context of both school and general really does enable you to start to consider where you are looking at in terms of the areas of a student's life. And the other thing is, I would say that it is also not UK centric. And given that we are in an international school, when you're looking at these different aspects of tracking, this doesn't matter whether you are in the UK or in an international setting. These are things and behaviours and ways of being that we find are relevant for all of our students, much in the same way we've found with the parent signposting as well. So they are the broader things that I would suggest that STEER gives us that other surveys don't.
Actually, if I could just pick up on something there, I think there's a couple of things which are particularly interesting. You talk about being an international school and not being UK centric. I think that's, from your point of view, that you're right. It's absolutely critical, isn't it? I also particularly thought it's what you said about complementing other areas of school is so important, isn't it? It's one piece of the jigsaw. It's not the only one, but it combines with everything else. And I'm going to pinch, if I may, your use of the word ecosystem. I'm going to use that one myself, because I think that's exactly what it is, and it adds to that sort of ecosystem in terms of building up a picture of the complete pupil. Fran, were you going to come in on that one as well?
Yes, actually, I was going to talk through what we do with the data once it's in, because I think looking at the example on the next slide is perfect to describe what we do and what we know about the student by looking at this data. So this is an example of what, after an assessment, what you will find for an individual, for example. So the pastoral team will all have a look at this, and you can see as well on this slide, this is about a student who in school, you can see looking at that data, has increased risks. So I think we've got self-disclosure and low seeking change there. So we can see as a pastoral team that something between now and say the last assessment has contributed to this. Could be due to a number of reasons, but the key here, following on from what Kelly has shared, is about knowing our students. And if we know our students, we can try to determine, okay, what may have happened, what may have contributed to this. And actually, this information helps us develop those action plans. So depending on what we know of a student and looking at this, we can actually just dig a bit deeper. So we can see the student here, we've got low self-disclosure, we've got low seeking change. Sometimes as teachers or mentors, we can forget exactly the details of these risks. We can forget what they mean and what those minor details that are very important are. But actually the great thing about this platform is that's okay, because you can click on these risks and it will tell you and remind you what they are. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that you can click on one of these polar biases. I think we've got low self-disclosure. This is what it's looks like, and here we can learn a bit more about that individual. And the great thing is we can see their assessment data, so we can see the questions, how they responded. We can see those risks. We've got learning risks, got social risks, mental health risks, and these are really useful for us as a pastoral team in getting to know our students. And also we use it as an opportunity to utilize the role of a trusted adult in our school. So if we move on to the next slide, with those risks.
Actually, just before we do, Francine, I think one of the things which you picked up on, which I would just like to highlight, both in this one and in the previous slide, is that ability to be able to see pupils over time, isn't it? That tracking. And as you rightly pointed out, suddenly there's something that's happened between the two assessments that has shifted, and to be able to see that pupil over time, I think is really important, as you pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we can see these risks. And actually, this is new this year, I believe, which is
Right.
exactly what we needed. It's those nice reminders of what low self-disclosure is, but also what that looks like in terms of risk. And the great thing here is that we can look at these and we can see, have we seen some of these behaviors already? Because we might have, just maybe not enough to be flagged. Have we seen some isolation, for example? If you look at that social and emotional risk, it points us in the right direction of knowing what to look for. Perhaps the student is eating lunch on their own and not with their peers, or perhaps they've got some difficulty in lessons, but they're unlikely to ask for support. And knowing this and knowing these risks helps us identify what to look for, ask the right questions, and we do tend, I've said it before, but we use our trusted adults to start that process. And then we have, sorry, go on.
Do you want me to move forward?
Yes, please. Then we have the how does it feel to be me? And this is very useful on the website. You can click on this for any pupil, and it's really worth the read, especially before having conversations with students, because it just helps you understand their perspective. A student could be really struggling. And what do we need to do to reach out and to prevent behaviours escalating? What actions are we going to take to reduce bias? So it's really useful to find out, how does it feel to be them, because it can help us have the right kind of conversation with students.
So with all that in mind, obviously once you see the data for a pupil and you can think, okay, how can we support that pupil a little bit more? Tell me a little bit more about the individual action plans that you can produce as a result of what you're seeing. So this is what we're seeing, this is what the pupil is saying. How can we help?
So firstly, ASD crunches the data for us. So it already categorizes our priority pupils. They're the students that we work with first. So our mentors will go through and write these individual action plans. And the great things about this process is actually it gives you a list of potential facts and information about the student. And you can tick what you know, but also what you might think is happening. So perhaps a student common experience is someone has misused some information they've shared, or perhaps we know that there's a family breakdown. This is all in that tick list section. So very easy, no typing. You select what is, as you know, accurate or could be accurate for that individual. And then it gives you some pre-written actions, actually. It's very, very handy. And they're small, very small actions, very achievable. And I think that's key, is that it's very achievable. So, for example, we've got polar low seeking change here. And the action could be encourage a student to step outside their comfort zone and join a club, or maybe an after-school activity. Sometimes some of our students need someone to support them in selecting something, or to support them in communicating what they want to do, or perhaps participating in the school production. Small things, small actions like that have a really big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very strategic and very precise, isn't it? In terms of the support that you can give them. So in terms of the so that's looking at the individual plans. We looked also at the sort of that more strategic overview, which I know you've been doing. So what extra information can the data give you? I mean, for example, can you look at the data to look at school trends, for example?
Yeah, so over the last 2 years, we've been really zooming out a little bit and identifying those trends. We've now it's become our routine to have cohort action plans or whole school action plans. Identifying trends can help us in many ways. We may find that in year 9, there is a sudden rise in number of, say, low self-disclosure, or perhaps overregulation, one of the composite risks. And so that also allows us to anticipate what might come in the future. And we use that information in a number of ways. Firstly, we will try and create opportunities in our wellbeing curriculum. Secondly, sometimes it's more about the culture that we foster. So you'll see perhaps overregulation in school is quite high. And then what can we do as a staff body to model behaviour that will help support that? So it can be as simple as ourselves as professionals, as teachers, we make mistakes, or we all make mistakes, but perhaps we need to draw attention actually to our mistakes, because it's okay to make mistakes. And modeling behaviours like that with students, hopefully they will feel like, it's okay if I make a mistake. I'm not going to monitor myself so carefully in the lesson. I'm going to go and give it a go. And that's really how we are using, when we zoom out a little bit, how do we use those trends?
Absolutely, and if I'll click forward to the next slide in a minute, but I'm not going to spare your blushes when we look at this graph here that just shows how well you're doing as a school in the way that you are actually reducing the number of polar biases in school and the number of what we might call priority pupils, which is quite unusual. And if you can see that bit at the bottom, how impressive that is. So very often the number or the percentage of priority pupils goes up in school. You are actually reducing the amount of priority students in school, which is incredibly impressive. So if I just go back to there, that's showing exactly what you were saying about the overregulation, and you can see that in that bottom graph. That is one of the things that you're trying to address in exactly the way that you mentioned, in terms of using those mistakes as a positive and a way of furthering on, which I think is incredibly important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see there as well, there's like in school versus the outside of school as well. And I think that's really important. If we look at our school, I'd say our classes are relatively small. So also some of these risks that they're also expected too in the environment. And it just goes to show, actually, every school is different. But what you do need to do is get to know your students and the environment and be able to adapt to address those challenges.
And in fact, if I share the next slide, exactly that, isn't it? Which is what you're saying. There's a number of ways in which you can address those risks, whether that's as a cohort plan covering, could be a whole year group, it could be a house, it could be an entire school, in the way that you suggested it. And these are quite easy to write.
Yeah, very easy. And actually they give you a good list of strategies, things you can use in assembly, things that you can put into your wellbeing curriculum or PSHE curriculum, or it could be things that you could consider. Maybe you've got house events. You can kind of seek opportunities to just tackle some of these risks as a whole cohort or whole senior school. Very small but very powerful.
And in terms of being able to see the impact, because obviously that's crucial in a school, isn't it? So this is what you've seen, this is what the pupils are telling you through their answers. This is what you've seen, this is what they're saying to you. So this is what you're putting into place. Are you able to see then the impact of what you've been doing?
I think in the environment, we can see the impact, absolutely. If we're looking at the platform, I think you can measure the impact in a number of ways. Obviously, we review the action plans. It's a very quick way to review action plans. It's a simple button, whether we believe in what we see here, there has been a positive outcome. Additionally, the students take the assessments termly, and so within each term in that academic year, you can show, you can see here, has there been an improvement or has there not? And it's very, very easy to access this information. It's very quick. It's already, you can interpret it just by looking at it. And the great thing is we're not needed to crunch that data, and instead we can spend that time working out how we put these actions into practice.
And again, you're being extremely modest, but you can see the impact that your action plans have had there. So 70% of pupils who were on an action plan, their data is improved, and 100% of those within that cohort have improved, which is tremendous. So I'm very conscious of your time and giving up all your time. So just a couple of final questions, if I may. And I'll just stop sharing my screen a second. As an international school, you've mentioned a little bit about how it's not UK centric. How is this particularly useful?
If I may take that one, Robert?
Yes, absolutely.
So what I would share, and I'm sure many people who are in this webinar who work in an international setting will identify with, is that communities are at the heart of international schools, and with that comes trust, which is at the centre of all that we do, how we support, how we work with our students and families. And we develop this trust by building relationships with our community. And we can do this by knowing our students. And Trevor referred to being predictive, preventative, and precise. And this is one of the ways in which we do that in supporting our students and their families. Being a parent of a teenager is not easy for many people. When you want to throw into that mix the challenge of doing it in an international setting where you're removed from networks or traditional setups that you may have, that only furthers the challenge. And the irony here, of course, is being in an international school, there is to a degree a transient nature of both teachers and students. And so your question is, how is this particularly useful? I would say it's useful because it anchors us in many different ways. And before you referenced, or Trevor referenced, it enables us to hear every voice, have that longitudinal approach, which is vital given that you have this transient nature of teachers who may be in your community for 3 years and then move somewhere else. And it does enable you to prioritise and have that target action plan. All of this, if I circle back to the community and trust, it helps us to foster trust within our community. And what we have found is that it's not just about steering our students, but also our families as well, in what can be really tricky years for our families when they're not surrounded by those support networks that they have themselves grown up with, or have families back home who are familiar with, well, if you were here, you'd be able to do this. So what this does is enable us to support our community in ways, because of the insights that we have, that we're entrusted with in finding out about their children.
Fantastic. And sadly, time is against us. But thank you so much for being able to share not just your knowledge and understanding, but those slides as well, giving us a little bit of an insight into how you're able to track, how you're able to help, how you're able to see those trends, sort of whether that is as a whole or individually. And you can see the work that you're doing, the passion with which you talk about your students, is obviously having a major impact on the well-being of those who are in your school, and hopefully we can play our small part in that, and give you that data and those strategies that can help. But thank you so much for your time. That's been incredibly helpful and explaining that so clearly for people who might not know very much about it. So thank you to Trevor for joining as well. And I know we can't see her, but for Claire working behind the scenes to make sure that everyone else can see us. Thank you, Claire. But thank you very much again for your time and for your work in preparing as well. So thank you, everyone, and hopefully that'll have been of benefit to you. But thank you very much again. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.